Welcome everyone to Doodle to Doing. I'm your host, Karen Light, Creative Executive Function Coach for creatives at How Doodle. Here we doodle discuss concepts and practical tips for helping you achieve your creative goals. In my years of working with creatives, both coaching and teaching, I have witnessed the power of trusting oneself. Yet many of us do not trust ourselves. The prevalent message we've received throughout life about the way we should do something can slowly erode away that self-trust when your way is different from the norm. And we creatives tend to be different from the norm. How can we remember what feels natural for us? How can we regain trust that what feels natural to us can actually be good and helpful to us? I'm excited to have my friend and fellow creative, Jarrett Clayman, here with me so we can chew on this complex topic together. Welcome, Jarrett. I'm so happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Jarrett, would you just like to tell everybody what kind of creative you are? Give them some insight into you.
Sure, I'd love to. So I think just to off the bat say that I just love using creative energy. Like if somebody gives me a prompt and says, all right, use this prompt and what are your ideas? Like I thrive in situations like that. And that has led to me really enjoying writing in particular, I think. And I'm a musician and singer songwriter, but also poetry as well. But I tend to have an inclination towards things that like some rhyming aspect of things, even with like loose rhyming or being flexible with it. I like the rule of rhyming. It just I don't know. It just makes my brain happy. So I find
Yeah, a little
myself.
creativity loves some rules, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Weird
exactly.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and otherwise, I'm a mental health counselor in Massachusetts, and busy with that, and doing my best to keep creativity as part of my life, and balance family life as well.
And curious, does creativity sort of leak into your practice as a mental health counselor, or in what ways that leaks in?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. I think one of my strengths, as I mentioned, like I love being given a prompt and then saying like, what comes to mind. So everybody who comes to see me has kind of their own individual, unique challenges that they're experiencing. And so I really like being part of a brainstorm process for different strategies that actually fit through the filter of their life and their strengths and challenges, so that we're actually thinking of things that might be inclined to be used, or have some I don't know, just intuitive aspect to them, or even tap into the person's own creativity.
I like that because I think when you're really in that kind of process with people, it does become much more like the topic we're talking about today. It does become much more natural to them, tapping into, what they actually intuitively, like you said, might know about themselves, but
Yeah,
are not trusting, right? Like are not trusting, or maybe just hasn't been made super aware
yeah.
until you have that conversation. Oh, that's so great. Well, I'm so excited to have you. And we're going to dive in with a dump. So we're going to dump some thoughts out that will be some fodder for our doodling. And if you're listening, I really encourage you to grab something to doodle, write with, and on to get the full experience of this doodle cast, because you can be led through it just like a workshop if you want to, or feel free to listen. I'm sure you'll get a ton out of it that way too. But we're going to start with a dump. And what we're going to dump out for just like 30 seconds is messages that you have received as a creative that can sometimes cause you not to trust yourself. What are messages or any thoughts, words, anything that comes out around that? Let's just dump for about 30 seconds.
Okay, so we're just writing it down.
Yeah, just write it down, dump it out. more seconds. I could probably go all day, but it's good to just get a little bit here without
Yeah,
overwhelming ourselves, right?
yeah. I feel good
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
You feel good about your list? Okay. All right. I got some good stuff going too. So let's share. What are some of the things that are popping up on your list?
So the first one that came to me is like I guess the it as I'm about to say the language or the words, it feels very much just like a thought in my brain type of language. But while you have the talent, you don't have the follow through.
Mm.
I really believe in my talent as a creative and as a songwriter, and you know I have enough music influences that are in kind of the mainstream genres that that you know the music I write has some pop element to it, while it's also like maybe folksy and more like lyrically focused or rock oriented. I even have done some dabbling in writing like rap lyrics because I love
Mhm.
rhyming, and I love
Mhm.
playing with words. So and the outcomes of me doing that, I'm like, wow, I really have faith in what this sounds like. So the as the word as the kind of word showed up for me, that while you have the talent, you don't have the follow through.
Mm, yes. And I think a lot of people would resonate with that, listening to it. I think it really, I think coincides with one of mine, which is like, you should only be focused on one thing at a time, and I'm not very good at that. So like, which can make it appear even that you're not following through, right? Like if you're somebody who does a little something over here and then a little something over here without finishing that first,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to unplug from that message that you're just not following through because we have this arbitrary, sometimes timeline as to when it should be complete or,
Yeah,
like, I don't know. Does that
yeah,
correlate to you? Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, one of the things that makes me think of that wasn't originally on my list, but I think resonates as a result of the spark that you created there is like start with the hard thing. I'm like, but that's where I need the most momentum. Like, you know, um,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of
That is so
times
true.
I don't always start with the hard thing. Sometimes I start with what feels more intuitive, just to get some creative juices flowing, get some of uh, my dopamine working with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I try to uncondition that one for myself and others all the time, but it is super ingrained. Like it's really it's in there sneakily sometimes. I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing that again."
yeah,
I'm making judgment about what I'm working on right now instead of, "Hey, I'm getting some work done," right?
yeah.
Man, I another one that comes up really strong for me a lot is this idea that how I'm doing things has to make sense to everyone else.
Mm,
It needs to be very logical and linear, and like everybody should be able to see the the steps or the reasons why it's being done this way.
mm.
Um, how does that ever come up for you or something like that?
Let me think. So um, I think I think for me, it's less about like um, wanting the steps or the process to feel clear to people. Um, but what does come up for me, and I don't even hate this, but like I want what I create to be accessible to people. Like
Hmm.
and I, music. I don't know if I actually don't know if music is unique in this way, but um, and actually it's not, as I'm even saying that out loud. Like there's plenty of music that is like very has its own fan base,
Hmm.
and may not be for the majority, um, but some people are just like, yeah, that's my favorite artist or band or whatever. um, but for me, there's something I value about accessibility,
Hmm.
and the music that I really gravitate towards has some accessible piece of it, and
Hmm.
so like if I'm creating something that doesn't feel accessible to me, or I imagine it's not accessible it, with some ease to others, that's it's not always my thing. But I say I don't
Yeah.
hate it because like it's the music that I like. I want to
Yeah.
make the music that I like, and a lot
Yes.
of that is somewhat more accessible and not so kind of off off kilter.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I resonate with that. And it's like finding the line there of like, um, I've always said I don't want to just make art for other artists. Like,
Mm,
great if they think it's cool or like clever or well done or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like art is such a communication tool for me, and like a way for me to say something in a way that to me feels like the clearest expression of it. And if that can't be communicated to, you know, most people, then it feels like I'm not expressing or communicating, right? Like it feels stuck. And yet at the same time, I don't want it to be the guiding principle that keeps me from exploring
hmm
wherever I want to go. So yeah, it's a really interesting play and balance to kind of think about, because most of the people in my life are not visual artists. Like, some of them are, but some of them aren't.
Yeah,
So like it's always a good touchstone, right?
yeah.
Uh, so we've touched on a few things here. Is there anything else on your list that you want to make sure and share, or does that
Yeah,
feel?
there's
Yeah,
two, but they're similar.
yeah, yeah.
So one is an obstacle means you're doing it wrong. That's
Oh, good one.
that's a tough one for me. And
Uh-huh.
then the other one is if you're unsure of the next step, there's no step to take.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, those are big. And I think really important to talk about, because it's very easy to get into failure mindset, and just think, oh, well, this big barrier means it's not for me, or I'm not doing it, or I'm failing in some way. I can't see a step. Now it's almost like you're going to live out the first thing you said,
Yeah,
right? Of the not
the
follow
follow through.
through.
Yeah,
It becomes like the fulfilling self-prophecy
yeah,
cycle there. Yeah. So
yeah.
these all really kind of start work. We can see how they all start playing together,
Right.
um, to kind of, yeah, make this really, really challenging sometimes.
They love to play
So
together.
yeah, they really do. They're like they've got the trauma bond thing going on, best friend trauma bond going
Yeah,
on versus the um so let's take a second to just doodle for about 60 seconds
sure.
when how it feels, these messages. um yeah, when these messages are taking a hold of us and maybe preventing us from doing our creative work, what does that feel like to us? So however that comes out for you in 60 seconds. Okay, so what did you doodle over there about how this feels?
So let's see. I'm gonna try to hold it up with there
Mm,
being gonna get the right angle here.
mm-hmm.
That.
I see it. It looks like there's a lot of effort being pushed up, but there's something that is like a limit. Like I see like a limit, like
Yeah.
a lot of like frustration limit,
Yeah.
straight solid line there of like, what's that next level? I can't seem to get beyond it.
Right. Right. And it gets kind of messy. Like yeah,
Yeah.
there's kind of there's a direction, there's
Mm-hmm.
some energy that culminates in a messy way rather than in a like clean, purposeful way.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's at least how I'm interpreting as I as I'm looking at it and as I was drawing it as well.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting too. Another thing that comes up for me when I think about it is almost like there's a root, but the flower can't get beyond the surface. Like
Oh
there's even a
yeah.
flower, like it almost looks like a
Oh,
flower
I
to
love
me, and like
that.
it just can't shoot up.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I, I like
Yeah.
that too because that's so how it feels, right? It's like I have
Yeah.
this beautiful thing, like
And it
or
stays in
ideas.
but it stays
Yeah.
under the surface. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to what you were saying about trusting in the talent. Like you see the talent that's there, but how to get it through.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm writing that down. I really like that metaphor.
I really like your drawing because I think that's so powerful and so true. And we just feel like we know this thing is really beautiful. Unfortunately, I think sometimes with over time, if you can't seem over and over to get it through, people start doubting the flower that they have or the
Yeah.
beautiful talent that they have. But I think this one really shows that you truly do believe you have this thing that
Mm.
is beautiful. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what came up for me.
Mm. Yeah.
Definitely feels like
Yeah. Like something blocking kind of the energy, the sun, that's trying to be. It looks like it's trying to be carried in some way, or at least removed. But certainly,
Mhm.
yeah, certainly, yeah, certainly not in the place that it is blocking the light.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that the way one thing that I found interesting is that she's not facing
Mm.
this
Yeah.
piece. Because the feeling that I had was just like almost like you have to turn your back around to push this boulder or like carry the weight of something. And it
Mm.
makes you turn away from, like, it feels like you're trying to get to it, but the way you're going about it actually takes you further away from it, is sort of
Yeah.
what I start thinking about when I look at that.
Can you say why? So that could have been done without the sun, like how you just
Mm.
described it. What is the sun's meaning to you? Like how did the sun make it in there?
I think of the sun as like a bright source of energy, like really like it radiates. This feels like it's going to squish you, but this is very radiating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it feels, I know it isn't technically in scientific terms, but it feels endless, right? Like it feels like it's always there,
Yeah.
sort of waiting for you. And yeah, and this move going about it with those sorts of messages just make me feel like even though I'm trying very hard, I'm actually, it feels further and further away than
Yeah.
closer.
So what that is making me think of is like in a situation like that where somebody is wanting to access the energy, the sun, or whatever, and there's this big boulder in the way. um, the problem solving being like, oh, like I have to move it rather than I have to move around it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or
yeah, like
yeah, something like that.
yes, no, I think that's a really, I love that because there's actually this process that I take people through called magical mindset, and like it is that it's like how can you re-see this boulder, how can you
Mm,
re-see the block, right? Like what if it's like even the thing that gets you to the other side instead of the thing that's keeping you from it, or use your imagination. Do you have like a really cool like repelling system, or are you like, who knows, can you just tap it and maybe it's not actually solid, like who cares, like play with that
right.
sort of notion instead of it being something that um yeah, I think the judgment of the messages can keep you from seeing those things.
Yeah, I love how you just said, could the blockage that you see or the obstacle that you see as being in your way be your kind of root, or could that be like something that actually propels you? And what that made me think of with your doodle was like you might get even better sunlight if you could stand on top of the boulder,
Yes.
you know?
Yes, yeah, climb on top of it, maybe it doesn't have to move, like, yeah, at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, cool.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to invite everybody to turn to a fresh page. We're going to create a little tool. hopefully that can be helpful for you long after this podcast, kind of a mind mappy-ish kind of thing. And in the center of it, we're going to spend about 60 seconds doing a doodle of, I want you to imagine what it could be like if you could like trust yourself more in your creative life, like imagining what you don't have to know exactly what that means yet, but we all, can get a sense of what self-trust means, right? And like, how might that really, I don't know, I don't transform or even positively influence your creative life. So let's do a little doodle in the center of this tool for you for the next 60 seconds. This is one that I'll encourage you to come back to and maybe keep playing with, because it's one that can, I think, grow as you get more ideas. But yeah, I got this little person flying in the middle of mine. So no boulders needed, right? Like it doesn't matter if there is a boulder. It's just she's got wings. She's soaring. The light is actually around her. Um,
I love
and
that.
I always think of this, like, I always like little spirals because I think they have lots of cool meanings. But one of them to me is just like ideas and creativity and,
Yeah.
Just good energy. What came up for you?
So I couldn't not use the flower thing. Um, uh, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it.
Mhm.
So what I'm gonna kind of do a reveal. So that
Yeah.
looks pretty similar. Actually, here, I don't. Let me hold it the other way. There we go. So that probably looks relatively similar to the other one. I don't know if you can see it, right?
Yep. Yep.
But so it's not that a blockage can't happen, right? Or
Mhm.
that like getting past the surface is gonna just, oh, it's gonna be easy now and whatever. But when it's time to get past the surface, what nutrients can I give the root in order to do that? And so I have sun and rain that have made the
Oh,
flower emerge.
I
Yeah,
love that. Yeah,
and
and
this.
I remember it reminds me, I used to do a bit of farming, and when I was first learning and I was working with this farmer, and like we had a bunch of seeds that were planted in a greenhouse before the season to plant them outside. And she was going through one day and she was doing this on top of all the seedlings, like waving her hand and being kind of rough at them. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, I'm mimicking
The
harsh
wind.
wind. That's what
Yeah,
makes the roots grow. And I'm like, whoa.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Which, right, and I mean, also like when you buy a plant or whatever, it always like I always feel like I'm not willing to be aggressive enough with breaking up the roots. So because
Yeah.
like the roots grow into whatever the shape of the pot is, and
Mhm.
can't go beyond that. But when you take a plant from a pot and put it into the ground or a tree or something like that, um, if it's been in the pot for long enough, you have to actually break up the roots so that it doesn't think it's still contained in a small space, even when it's not.
Whoa, I didn't know that. That's so cool. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and it gets even better, like with that, and also with like the wind blowing and whatever. It's like, yes, trauma to the plant helps it grow.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Now,
so,
now,
and
some reasonable amount of like trauma that it's equipped to deal with, right?
Right, right. Like I don't want to come by and just like step on it and squash it to
Right,
the ground.
right,
That wouldn't be good.
right. Yeah. Not
Oh,
many
it's so
plants have
good.
grown that way. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
So I love that. And I think, when I think to a lot of the clients that I've worked with too, or even in my own story, um, what we tend to really start, it's like the story of like the wounded healer, right? Of like how those things become the things that we then help other people with, or that we really connect with other people around. And that connection alone can be really healing and helpful, no matter if you're doing a profession or just like, out in the world doing whatever you do.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I have one client I've been working with for a long time, and she's just getting this job, and she was answering a question in an interview, and they were like, well, what's some of your challenges? And she's like, well, my executive function has been really challenging, which might sound really scary to say to an employer, or possible employer, because you want to come off as very responsible and like got it
yeah,
together and you can do the job. And I just thought it was so brave of her, because she was like, I told them that my executive function, but I've been learning a lot of things as a coach, and that I can connect with the clients this place wants to serve because of it. And I was just like, boom, like how
yeah,
inspiring that is,
yeah.
to take that thing that not too long ago would have caused such shame
Yeah,
to
it's
her,
true. Yeah,
um, and would have kept it all hidden.
yeah, that's great.
So it's a little tricky, right? Like the message that we get, and these we can find ourselves sort of playing by other people's rules or a list of shoulds pretty um covertly. Sometimes we don't even realize that it's happening. And one of the things that I always like to discover is like, what are the signs, right? What are the signs that, oh, I'm playing by somebody else's idea of what is the right way to do these things? um and to develop our tool a little bit, what I'd like us to do for the next minute or two is to kind of coming off of that center, like representing your signs in some way, a sign that you are not necessarily doing things in a way that's good for you or natural to you, but you're following by society rule or somebody in your life rule. And just as many as you kind of can around there, because we're going to then come back and start talking about ways we might um, sort of realign with ourselves and trust ourselves in that process. Does
Mm.
that sound clear enough to you?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's
Yeah,
do that for a couple minutes.
cool. I'm gonna start to use a pen so that's a little bit darker.
Yeah.
Cool.
However you want to do it, totally fine. So what are some of your signs, Jarrett?
Well, okay, so kind of what I drew. I actually think that this fits pretty well. Um, So there are weeds in competing for the resources, and underneath you can see that how the roots are trying to, or not even necessarily trying to, but the roots are taking the what would have been the water and the nutrition for the flower and drawing the resources into them, which then are making them grow taller, which then are making the sun harder to reach the flower so that it can
Mm.
grow. Um,
Mm. So when you are experiencing maybe trying somebody else's way, it like pulls the energy away from your own creative projects, the thing that you really want to kind of nurture, in other words. Yeah.
yeah, and when you said like it often happens in really covert ways that are somewhat, not or that aren't really obvious, that
Mhm.
the what comes to mind for me is I usually know that it has happened, not that it's happening,
Mhm.
because I am noticing like thoughts of defending or like repetitive thoughts in my mind of like justification or defending my decisions or thoughts of resentment. So like when I notice that pattern of like looping thoughts of that style, I'm like, ah, I'm not aligned with my authentic self right now, or something
Yes.
like that's the sign to me. But I don't always
Mhm.
notice it when it's happening. Although I think I'm getting better, but that's why like the roots kind of underneath the surface are, it's the thoughts that are under the surface that are competing for my attention rather than my creative thoughts being able
Yes.
to, yield something.
I love that. Yeah, and it makes me think I had to doodle another one while you were talking because I'm like, it's so true. Like the looping thoughts are such a
Mm,
good indication that something is going on, like when I'm way too in my head about it. And it also makes me think about how, although I don't buy into that we only need to do one thing at a time, I do find it's extremely helpful to have a limited number of things
yeah, sure.
um, that works for my capacity. And but yet the covert way it kind of comes in, like your roots reminding me of it, right? Like it can, everything still is a good idea and everything still even seems maybe hopeful or good for other people that I'm working with, or so it, but if there's too many of them, then yeah, they really start zapping the energy that could be used for the thing I really really want to bloom. um and that it makes me think about how self-trust is just so related to being honest with ourselves,
Mm,
like what is really, and I think that that can be a bit of a excavation process, right?
yeah,
We might think we're being honest, and then I have this all the time, and 6 months later I was like, well, I was still not completely honest here, and now I'm getting a little deeper, closer to what's true.
yeah.
um and so yeah, to kind of doing the necessary weeding.
Yeah, yeah. And right, and
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know when it's starting to grow that it's a weed, right? It looks like many
Hmm.
other plants too. It's kind of making me think based on what you're saying too, right? Like it's another plant in the garden, or oh, was that maybe like is that from last year or something? Oh, no,
Yeah.
it's a weed. Okay, now that
Yeah.
it's grown and I can see that this other plant isn't doing well, you know, something
Hmm.
like that.
So
Yeah,
true. I mean, we use a lot of compost. And so sometimes, I mean, we always have random stuff that's coming up and we're like, is that something we want to pick or not? Like, is that a
yeah,
vegetable or is that like, we don't know until it gets a little further up, and
yeah,
you're like, oh, it's strangling my other plants. Get rid of it. Or like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, this is really nutritious. Keep it going.
yeah.
Man. Yeah, I have like a few things on mine. Mine are little stick people around there doing different stuff
Mm,
to kind
yeah.
of capture it. Like one of them is like, and this is why I also resonate with you saying sometimes we don't know till afterwards. Suddenly I'm exhausted, right? Like I
Mm,
just want my head on the pillow. I feel really depleted, and I'm like, okay, something's going on there that I wasn't trusting a boundary that I had for myself, or I was doing something in a way that was really difficult that made it harder and take more energy for me. But yeah, exhaustion is usually, I would say there's the first one that came up. That's my first indicator. It's
Actually,
kind of important.
that yeah, that resonates with me so much, and it didn't make it even into my thoughts. But yes, I mean, like oftentimes I am feeling depleted if I'm not aligned with what feels true to me.
Yeah. And I think it's sometimes for me too, one of the things that I'm up against a lot, especially if it's the weekend. Weekends are coming and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have all this time to make something, right? Like I want to work on this painting or I want to do this. But then what happens on the weekends? People are like, come over for a barbecue. Let's
Yeah,
go for a bike ride. And like all those things sound lovely. And you want to be social and you want to have your friends too. And then so it becomes like this challenge of like, what do I really want right now?
yeah,
And when I don't take enough time to create, it doesn't matter if I had fun and if those things were nurturing, I'm still exhausted because I
yeah,
didn't do what I needed. So I think it's a tricky thing. And I give myself a lot of grace there, right? Because I like people too.
yeah, yeah.
um, and then another one, I don't know if you could see it, but this is a stick figure and this is the to-do list. It's like the to-do list is just not
Oh
human,
yeah,
right? Like it's kind
right.
of the opposite end. Like these two can play out a pretty vicious cycle together.
Mhm.
Um, and this one is like kind of feeling like the weight of the world. Uh, yeah, I'm just taking too much responsibility for places I don't need to take responsibility for because somebody else said I should be very responsible in that way.
Yeah.
Um, that's how it comes up. And then I put this one. This is another swirl, but I put it up by the
Yeah.
head because of those thoughts
Mm,
that you said.
yeah.
Yes. So with these things, I'd love to just kind of talk through. Let's come up with some ideas, right? Some ideas of like, okay, you caught yourself here. You're in this place, and what helps you to emerge from there? So let's think about like 60 seconds to ourselves. You can do some doodling and or writing, but I want to have a rich conversation before we wrap this up on those things so people can really walk away with ideas when they say, oh, I found myself. What helps me get back on track? And
Yeah.
we can doodle or write around those things too. How you doing over there?
Good, I think.
Feeling
In,
complete enough?
well, yeah, feeling complete at least in one area, and complete enough to start sharing. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that's just it. This is just the beginning of a conversation. So,
Yeah.
if you're out there listening, you don't have to have all these answers right away, but kind of the beauty of doodling with anything is it starts the contemplation process and the awareness, the new awareness and ideas going in the right direction. Yeah. So what's something that comes up for you? What are you feeling confident in, you said?
Yeah. So um, when I'm thinking about, all right, I've caught myself. How do I, or I've caught myself not trusting myself,
Mhm.
and that might be with the follow through aspect, or not believing in my own ability to have like perseverance, or and that might stop the initiation. And again, these all play together very, very well. Um, uh, and it makes me think of like, don't let, because my nervous system is going to be dysregulated in a moment like that, right? It's
Mhm.
and over time I can adjust that wiring, but like if I'm meeting myself where I'm at right now, I'm gonna feel dysregulated, and essentially choosing to have that dysregulation not be my last experience. So
Mhm.
what I mean to say is like, if if you're trying a new food or something like that, that for whatever reason to you tastes gross, it would be pretty unexpected for somebody to be like, well, that's the taste I'll just leave in my mouth for the rest of the day, I guess.
That's true, right?
Right? It's like, no, like
I love
you're gonna have something.
that.
Yeah, you're gonna have something that tastes better, or have a drink of something that like gets that taste out of your mouth and leaves you with a more pleasant experience.
It's
And
a
so
wonderful metaphor. Yes.
thank you. And so what I ended up drawing in terms of that is just like
Yeah.
having a yum backup plan, right?
Yeah. A young
Um,
backup plan.
so right, like, and again, I think part of that is um, allowing for what when the dysregulation happens, not meeting it with like my shame or judgments of like, oh, like the
Mhm.
dysregulation shouldn't be here, and this
Mhm.
is the sign that I'm not good enough, or that I should abandon this thing, or whatever. Um, it is more of, oh, there you are, I know what to do now, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it might come with taking a break first and re-regulating to do and doing something that gives me a little bit of like creative momentum that feels easier, like not doing the hardest thing first, and
Mhm.
easing back into it. Music, I feel, is great for that. Even just listening to music, dancing around. um, uh, yeah, like it can be a variety of things that just kind of take over my body and feel intuitive. Favorite songs are great for that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Um, and then being dedicated to revisiting the thing that originally dysregulated me.
Mhm.
Of like, okay, we're gonna try this again, and rather than the yuck being my final uh the final experience I'm left with,
Right.
or also not just having the yum lead me off into the land of yum, right? That's not
Yeah,
how
I
I
think it's
that's
really
not
important to come back. Yeah.
yeah, it's not how I grow, and that's not how these things get completed. That's how they get abandoned. And if my I feel like if my creative energy keeps feeling abandoned, like that that doesn't feel good to anybody or anything, you know.
Mm-mm.
And it just creates like more anxiety and fear around it, and probably shame of like, I'm an abandoner, that's what I am, kind of thing.
Yeah, it comes back to you're creating identity when you keep doing that, that maybe you don't want. And I love that. Like you're one of the things I often think about with creativity as it being an entity, and the importance of like if you care about someone, if you care about a relationship, if you care, you show up. Like you show up when it's challenging, you show up when it's fun, you show up in all the states if you really care about the relationship. Um, but you also have to find like the ways that you want to show up to respect it and like it's not just like, oh, I'm here, like it's kind of like, if we're having a conflict with someone, it's important how we show up. We're thoughtful about it. And sometimes we have to go away for a minute to think about that, right? To be like,
Yeah.
okay, how was I showing before that wasn't helpful or productive for the relationship? And how can I show up in a way that is helpful and productive for me, for them, for that relationship? And so I love that. Like, I don't want to just be somebody who abandons creativity. That really hits home.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I feel like there's two really beautiful kind of guiding questions that came up from what you were sharing too. First of all, it's like, how can I get a better taste in my mouth? I think that's a really fun way of looking at it. Like what can I do? Because if we are dysregulated, that's not where we're going to do our best cognitive thinking, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to have our ideas opened up. We're going to be stuck in a pattern or in some, emotion we might not want to be stuck in. So,
Yeah.
what can I do to get a better taste of my mouth? It's like, okay, then maybe I'll be a little bit more equalized and
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
it. And I could also think of like, how can I bring this yumminess back to it? Like, how do I
Yeah.
now integrate this with some of this yum? Um,
Yeah.
so the process keeps getting better and I have a different connotation with it. That's so powerful. It does remind me one of the things you were saying too of like what I wrote down, which is like one of them was like I am. I just
Mm,
wrote it.
yeah.
Because it's like I don't know if you've read like James Clear or Atomic Habits or any of that, familiar with him at all, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't, not specifically, but
Yeah.
I've heard it talked about before.
Yeah. Well, one of his things that I just think is beautiful, he talks about, he's not the only one. He's just been the mouthpiece lately, but like this identity based
Mm,
approach, right? Like, who do you want to be? Like, and how can you practice being that? Like every time you show up to your studio, let's say you practice being someone who goes to their studio to work on their art, or every
mhm.
time you play the guitar, you practice being someone who plays guitar,
Mhm.
not just in your head but for real. Like I
Yeah.
think that's so, like, it's one of my things that I think about when I am feeling one of these ways, because it's like, well, what have I been practicing being? Oh, I've been practicing being a people pleaser, let's say.
And
That's
that's
what
what
I've
I'm going
been
to get good
practicing.
at. Yeah.
And yeah, so oh, that's not what I want to practice. What do I want to practice? Oh, I'm
Right.
I'm practicing being someone who doesn't take care of herself, or I'm
Mm,
practicing being someone who doesn't trust herself, right?
mm, yeah.
Um, or isn't honest with herself. So like let's practice something else, and how do I want to practice that? So that's one of my things I think about a lot. Some of the other things that popped up for me, the first thing that came up was just going into nature, like chilling in nature.
Mm, yeah.
I don't know, whenever I'm like in the trees, it's like my what I feel like it does is return my body to its natural timing. Like I don't know how
Mm,
else to say that. I just feel things kind of just do this. And I'm like, oh, that's, if I'm feeling super like depleted, I feel myself get energized. But if I feel myself like go, 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 I feel myself come down, and it just kind of
mm,
brings me. And whenever I'm there, I don't know, I keep using this word natural, but for me, that's what it's really about. Whenever I feel like I'm in my natural timing, it's clear to me like what's needs to be chopped off this list. Like it's just
mm,
easier to decide or see things for me.
yeah.
Um, and so, or that I need to rest, but a lot of these things are so counterintuitive to getting things done. And I think
Right.
that can be a challenge to another message, right? Of like hyper productivity, you know,
Yeah.
complete, 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 complete.
That's such a great point that not not everything is necessarily a high urgency need, but it feels that way and can become really hard to figure out which ones don't have to be on the list unless the self-care, you know, shows up, and then it starts to become like, okay, all right, this one probably could go. This one, maybe a version of that. Like you start to get creative with it, even of like, oh, this version of this one could be there, but maybe not the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you saying self-care, it's like, okay, so now if you gone and taken care of yourself, now you are being someone who cares for herself. And who do we trust? We trust the people who care for us,
Yeah.
right? So
So true.
now we're building the self-trust through that caring of ourselves. We're giving ourselves that message that I will take care of you. I
Yeah.
got you. I'm not going to lead you astray. just because your idea or way of doing something might not be the norm, I'm not leading you astray, and you can trust me because I care for you,
Yeah,
you know?
I love that. Yeah, that's a really nice
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this conversation just, it's been helping articulate cool stuff. I really love it.
Likewise.
Yeah. And I think a few things like, it's so funny because we're talking about creativity, but also like how I do the creativity, like I will change that up too. Sometimes it's not about leaving the art making itself. It's about like I put music notes around it and just like
Yeah.
more of a doodly line, because sometimes if I am making a more meaningful piece or something, like the seriousness, like and the heaviness will start creeping in, and it's got to relate and it's got to blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if I just put the tunes on, like you said, kind of get into your body and just let myself play, it's like,
Yeah.
I don't even have to leave art making to feel better about art making.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that everybody out there got some really good ideas. And we're also curious if you want to leave comments about your ideas. When you find yourself, not trusting yourself, how can you start practicing taking care of yourself, start practicing that trust, finding the yummy again. I'm gonna have to use that a lot. I really love that. It was so fun.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, you want to say something?
Oh no, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, this has been delightful for me because I going actually full circle. It's like, all right, here's a prompt, Jarrett, go. Like just my brain just loves that process. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
privileged to be a part of the prompts that you're giving.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad they work for you. They work for me too. And that's one of the things that I really grappled with after coming out of school, right? Like you get prompts constantly as an art major, and then suddenly you have no prompts, and
Yeah.
so that could be another thing that you play with. Like if you are getting into that mode of feeling like, oh, I can't follow through because your creativity isn't stimulated, finding some prompts online, like they're everywhere. Like you can just watch more of these. I got prompts everywhere. But creativity isn't always about, that's another detrimental message, right? It isn't, people think, oh, I'm not actually creative if I haven't thought of everything myself.
Mm.
But creativity loves to play off of other things like Jarrett and I have been doing today. It loves prompts. It loves just enough rules, not too much to squash it, but just enough to play in.
Yeah.
So I love that you said that. I love it. Well, thank you again, Jarrett, for being here. And everybody who's listening, I'm going to include some links in the show notes so that you can connect with him. Those links will include both information about his therapy services if you're in Massachusetts and interested, and then also a way to connect with him to hear some music that he has created for free. So I'll include those below. And you can find out more about my offerings at howdoodle.com. Thank you so much for watching today and for being the amazing creative that you are. Take care, everyone.